have to top out, because if you go any higher, then you're sacrificing volume for margin. And
Hmm. Hmm.
while a big margin is nice, at the end of the day, you pay your bills with dollars, not percentages.
So talking about FSD, because I'm gonna ask some hot questions here for you. How do you see the deployment of FSD? Do you see that Tesla will sell cars in the future? Could they stop selling cars in the future? Does that make sense? Because I've heard also some people in my comments talking about this. I found it very interesting, so that's why I'm bringing this up. What do you think Tesla will do with the?
So there are people who will never stop buying a car. There are people who,
Mhm.
no matter
Yeah.
what the cost is, will always own a car. We are hunters and gatherers. And for those who are gatherers, they like to have their things, and they like to have their things in their things. So car sales will never go away. That would be just giving up some of the addressable market. And you'd say,
Mhm.
well, but Tesla might want to own all the cars that they manufacture. That is, as of even a $20 billion pile of cash will not buy you enough inventory to make it cash flow positive before you run out. So they may begin to start putting together a fleet, but
Mhm.
all the while they would be ramping up production even further. So I don't see private sales going away ever. I could see the end of selling you FSD, whether
Mhm.
it's just included or more likely licensed. And I think they would do that as long as there's still a steering wheel. Once there's no steering wheel, they have to sell it to you. Otherwise, you don't own your car.
Mhm.
But they would, yeah, but I could see licensing it. And there will be a window of time when they can charge anything they want for that. 200 a month would be the bare minimum for a utility of that magnitude. But it will be commoditized at some point. It'll be something that everybody fights over. Ours is cheaper. And once you've recovered your costs, sure, you're going to keep making it better, but it no longer costs infinity dollars to not get it done. Every dollar
Mhm.
you put in should yield some improvement. And if it isn't, you're doing it wrong. So I think in the beginning, it'll be more expensive, and then it'll become less expensive.
So when Tesla starts to ramp up production, like going, we are at the 10 million number, the magic 10 million, 20 million, maybe 20 million number. Let's say the 20 million number, a little bit more extreme, being on Elon's time schedule here, that maybe won't come into fruition. We don't know, but how do you see when really the production is ramped up, the cost structure is in line and everything? They have their materials, they have the supply chain is flawless. How do you think the costs of the production, for example, of a Model 3 could decline, and how much would be the margin? Like, what do you think about the craziest margin you can imagine with production? Have you heard a number? Have you thought about this? Or maybe you can guess, just guess. I don't know.
Sure, it would just be a guess. I certainly haven't heard any or talked to anybody about it, but there is a minimum that you should be charging. You don't need to sell cars at cost. So
No.
forgetting
Yeah.
about the extra cash on full self driving, because that
Hmm.
right there
Yeah.
triples your margin. Um,
Yeah.
even before counting that, just on the hardware, there's no reason that a fully ramped Model 3 couldn't have, yeah, 25 to 30% margins.
Hmm.
I think that's where it would have to top out, because if you go any higher, then you're sacrificing volume for margin. And
Hmm. Hmm.
while a big margin is nice, at the end of the day, you pay your bills with dollars, not percentages.
Hmm. That's true. That's absolutely true. And you have to sell those, and I mean, big margins could be. I mean, you can have, for example, luxury sport cars have a huge margin, but not the volume. So,
Not the
yeah,
volume.
that's true. Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
and if you look at like the Rimac, which is going to be 2-3 million,
Hmm.
and they say, oh, well, you started deliveries. No, you gave the prototype to somebody, but whatever. It's even at those prices, they're not going to make money, because they're only going to sell 150.
Hmm.
And by the way, I don't know if you heard, but the Rimac went out to the Nürburgring and beat the Plaid by 20 seconds.
By 20 seconds.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
So
interesting.
it's quite fast.
That's actually pretty crazy.
Yeah, 2
I
seconds would
haven't
have been
heard.
impressive. Yeah.
20 seconds. That's ridiculous.
It's still not
And
the fastest car by any stretch, but
yeah,
it did put up a good time.
awesome. Yeah, that's pretty good. But of course, yeah, the volume is the issue. Talking about like the other competitors, the EV makers, the other EV or ICE engine maker, or the established ICE car manufacturers or legacy car companies, and then you see Tesla, of course, doing their thing. But how do you see do you see a death spiral going on? And what indications do you see inside of the death spiral? Because we all know VW is struggling with their software still. It's a huge mess still, and they haven't figured it out yet. Audi also try to do a great job with their EVs. It doesn't look as good as well. Not talking about anything in the ballpark of FSD. They scrapped the plans already and everything. So innovation seems to stagnate everywhere. The legacy car companies seem to really have a hard time to make this transition, like we've predicted for years. But now we see it unfold. It's a pretty different story now. And we also see they still are betting on hybrids, because what should they do? They're stuck. They're really much stuck. So what for you are the biggest indications for legacy car companies to be in this death spiral, and how could they get out? But first, maybe we can go through the biggest drags for those companies. Yeah.
So right now it's very ugly on a number of fronts, but that doesn't mean it can't change quickly. Software is something that can be fixed, once and for all fixed. They can get it to a 9 and then spend the next 10 years getting it to a 10. That's fine. And software can be fixed quickly in ways that, for example, a culture of poor manufacturing cannot. So there are some manufacturers you've seen who, no matter what they do, cannot build a reliable car. That's something else. So if they get the software, and they can, that whole problem goes away. Then there's things like innovation. I'm going to argue they don't have to innovate. I'm going to argue that all the innovation needs to be in the drivetrain, and that's it. And that they can be 20% worse than the market leader and still make a car that most people would never know has anything missing. So electric motors are so much simpler. And if they can't build a good motor, they can probably license a good motor for cheap, or just buy a good motor for cheap. Not today, but in the next 3 to 5, definitely 10 years. Where they excel is in coach building, the actual part that goes on top. Legacy companies are very good at bending and painting metal. And that's not something that's easy to learn. So what I'm looking for to get out of the death spiral, to know if they're in one, because I saw a criticism on one of my videos. Do you think Toyota could be in trouble? They sold, 6 million cars, 8 million, whatever. Right. But in most of their biggest markets, they've got 10 years to stop selling all those cars and start selling electric cars. So what are they going to do? They need to be transitioning. They need to increase their sales of electric cars in the product mix by 10% a year, just to get close to where they need to be. And they're not doing it. So that means they need to be at 600,000, and then, 1.2 million, 1.8. I mean, they need to, and one bad sign I would look for is all the lithium locked up. And Jordan Giesecke from The Limiting Factor has a great series on it. It's very dry. I don't know how many people watched it, but I live for this stuff, man. And he was saying that these mines will not increase their output because the lifespan of a mine is generally 20 years. And if you want to use it up in 10 years or 5 years, you can just put in double or quadruple the equipment. But now you've got all this extra expense, and you don't have more material. You just sell it quicker. So a lot of these mines are just not going to increase output. They're going to keep the output low and keep it for 20 years while they're exploring for new stuff. And a lot of the lithium out there is spoken for. whether it's by
Mhm.
LG or Panasonic or Tesla themselves. SK Innovations is building new battery factories with Ford. That's going to run the chance of saving them. If you're not building your own battery factory, I don't know if you're going to make it. So what would I actually look for in the death spiral? For parts, first of all, for part suppliers to start going out of business. If somebody who makes a component for your gas engine disappears, that could be the beginning of the end. And also, if your volume pricing begins to erode, because just like increasing your buying gets you better prices, decreasing your spend gets you worse prices. And if all of a sudden your Camry costs 10 or 20% more than it did, or there's no margin left in it, that could be the death spiral right there. Because we're already in many parts of the US, a good electric car is cheaper than a Camry.
That's
If
true.
that's not making them lose sleep, then I don't know what they're doing.